welcome back to Beyond the Veil Tarot and Astrology. My name is Candice Marie. Thanks for joining me. I'll be your astrologer today. Happy Thursday. Wanted to put a video together for you guys today to talk about transits of Pluto in your natal horoscope. I'm titling this video Pluto's Purpose. If you guys like my content, you want to see more of it, make sure you click the bell button below so you're subscribed to the channel. You'll be able to get alerts for all the videos that we're putting out. And do consider dropping me a comment below, letting me know if you're under Pluto's kind of visit right now with a natal planet. Maybe you were born with a Pluto conjunction. We'd love to hear from you. Make sure you give us a thumbs up also, and do consider sharing. Any interaction with the channel is really helpful and helps the YouTube grow. So I appreciate your guys' support. Yes, I planned this for today. If you guys are watching this on February the 8th, the moon is currently in a transit with conjunction to Pluto. So we are just experiencing early this morning, the moon's going to leave Capricorn, it's coming into Aquarius. We are in a dark moon phase. We're getting ready for this new moon in Aquarius pretty soon, which is wild. But I intentionally waited to do this video today because I wanted to talk to you guys while the moon and Mercury were in conjunction to Pluto. So that way he can kind of come through and we can hear what he has to say. If you are somebody who is going through a Pluto transit, I'm sure you are already feeling a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today. But just as a reminder, Pluto is currently in Aquarius. It's going to be somewhere between 0 and 2 degrees of Aquarius this year. It'll experience a final retrograde back into Capricorn in the fall. So if you have any personal placements, I want to say like 28 degrees of Capricorn through 4 degrees of Aquarius. Maybe your sun, your moon, your rising is there, or you have a personal planet within these degrees. This video is for you. So you're going through a Pluto transit. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what to expect during this particular transit. And equally, this is a video that's kind of like evergreen. So if you've already gone through these transits, you're going to nod your head as you listen and sip your coffee or your tea. But if you happen to be somebody who's got other planets in Aquarius and you're anticipating a conjunction in the future, this can be particularly helpful for you. Equally, those of you guys who are Plutonian like me, you're going to be like, yes, welcome to my life. I've been really focusing on trying to make content that's more personal. It's not necessarily just what's going on in the cosmos. It's also talking to you guys about some of my experiences with transits. You may or may not have seen on my community tab, I posted recently saying, I want to do a video this month that's going to be questions that you guys ask me that I'm going to be answering. So if you have a question that you want to ask me, I saw so many really funny questions about me personally, my experience with tarot or astrology, my background, anything that you would want to ask. I'm going to be doing a Q&A video coming up. And I heard a lot of people ask about my experience with transit. So this is kind of my answer to that particular question. At some point in the video, I might even pull up my chart and show it to you guys so you can see what it looks like. But I have had Pluto touch all of my personal planets except for my moon. Yes, it is true. I've had Pluto on an angle. The only real aspect that I've had to my moon was Pluto square my moon, and certainly that adds a whole other flavor when you take into aspects into consideration. But this video, we're going to talk more about the conjunction. So I personally work with like a 2 to 4 degree orb. So if Pluto's hovering around those degrees, I would consider that a conjunction. Some astrologers believe that if Pluto's within 10 degrees, you're going to be feeling it. And certainly that's true. But I really want to talk about that close conjunction within those degrees. And that's when you're kind of like under the beams of Pluto. So, as Pluto hovers around these degrees this year, it's going to be really interesting because for me, the way that I've experienced this is that, Pluto's been in Aquarius since 2008. Yes, we saw it briefly enter, in and out last year, but Pluto in Capricorn has been slow changes. So we've almost felt like things are kind of decaying and kind of breaking apart or breaking down very slowly, and it's required a lot of work. That's because it's been in a cardinal earth sign. So Pluto's recent ingress into Aquarius, I don't know about you guys, but it's just like sudden changes and transformations. So this particular energy of Pluto in Aquarius is very different. I'm going to talk about that as well as Pluto transiting personal planets, give you guys some information about those transits, how to navigate them, and how Pluto may be seen. But like I said, with Pluto now in Aquarius, you know, these changes are coming rapidly. Now we've got Pluto in a fixed sign. It's in a sign that's both strongly associated with Aquarius as well as Saturn. So it's got a little bit of like a different flavor. Yeah, it's bringing about, you know, collective sweeping changes out in the world, but also in our own lives. So what I love about astrology is that, you know, really what we're experiencing in our own lives throughout some of these transits does affect, you know, our relationship with the world. And when we have enough people collectively going through an outer planet transit like this, it has the ability to wake us up. The irony, right, that Pluto is really the planet of death. It's associated with the underworld and Hades if you're into mythology. But Pluto does have a purpose as he goes through these particular connections in the natal chart. Like I said, full disclosure, I've had Pluto conjunct nearly all of my personal planets by conjunction at birth or by transit. So I will give you guys some of my stories about that as we go through this. But Pluto is personally one of my favorite, you know, topics to talk about. You know, as someone who has studied evolutionary astrology, that was really kind of the foundation of my astrological education, and, you know, what was, I think, the most fascinating kind of form of astrology personally. And yeah, it's really had a huge effect on my life. I've done a lot of work, obviously, in, you know, the metaphysical world. I work both as an astrologer, but also a psychic medium. So I definitely do have, with a Mercury-Pluto connection, some kind of, you know, feelers on the other side. Definitely a lot of weird, spooky experiences that I've had in my life, which I'll talk to you about. And, you know, like I said, this particular transit, if you're experiencing this in the natal chart, because Pluto is the furthest out in our solar system, this is a transit that is profoundly life-changing. Pluto transits can last anywhere from about a year to 3 years, depending on its retrograde motion. So it's not a quick transit. Likely, if you feel the conjunction, you know, it will awaken things, and then we'll see the retrograde, and it'll continue to kind of integrate the archetype of Pluto in your life. So it's certainly not a quick transit to kind of go through. And this is very different than, you know, Pluto aspects like the sextiles or the trines, which may be more harmonious and kind of about uplifting and empowering you. It's also very different than the square or the opposition, because that represents outside forces or, you know, things going on in your life that's forcing some sort of change or rebirth process. So, you know, this is where knowing astrology or studying astrology is really important. If you don't know a lot about your natal chart, I really recommend talking to a qualified astrologer who can work with you and talk to you about a particular transit, especially a Pluto transit in your life, because you really need to bring the whole chart together and assess it on a personal basis. While Pluto may be in conjunction to a personal planet, it's going to act very differently in the various houses. So personally, I'm an astrologer that believes houses trump signs. I'm going to look at where the Pluto transit is taking place, which house. This is going to show me which area of your life this is affecting you. And the conjunction with a natal planet in that house is going to show me almost like a fusion of those two kind of archetypal energies of the planets. And it's going to bring about some kind of necessary change. So not all Pluto transits are created equal, but in the end, they all bring about the same theme: rebirth, generally through transformations, endings, beginnings, dealing with fear, pain, trauma, death, etc., etc. So one of the first things that I wanted to share with you guys is my 6 P's of Pluto. This is something that I have kind of gone back to over the years. This is something that I personally created as kind of like a reminder for me when I'm going through my Pluto spirals, when I'm experiencing a really strong Pluto transit, or when I'm seeing, you know, Pluto's energy out in the world. I always refer back to this list as a reminder for me of Pluto's process, but also the purpose of Pluto in my own life. I'll put them somewhere in the description below so you guys can read this and you can kind of refer to this list because it might be helpful for you as well. And these kind of goes in steps, right? So there's going to be kind of like a step-by-step process of Pluto in my experience. And for me, the first P that comes up for Pluto is psychological, right? No surprise there. Pluto does have associations with psychology, with therapists, with crisis counselors, and anybody who can kind of help in times of need. Remember, Pluto rules the underworld, so it does have this connection to being willing to kind of go to hell and back and being able to tell the story of what you were able to kind of overcome. But psychological, I think of Pluto representing, drilling deep down into the earth, but it can also be about going deep down into our own psyche. So Pluto is known for psychological depth. So likely when we have a Pluto transit, we start to see things that's kind of coming out in the depths of our psyche, which can almost feel like volcanic, right? Something is like erupting and kind of coming up, which creates this like crisis scenario. And a lot of this is because, Pluto is linked to the depths of our subconscious mind. Its influence brings about issues and desires that have been hidden deep beneath the surface into the light. And so if you guys have been watching what's going on with the transits recently, in this last week or so, since Pluto's ingress, it started with the Sun-Pluto connection, which really represented like the death of our egos, or this awareness of where we need to shine a light on the dark, or crime, corruption, issues with abuse of power. And now we're going to be seeing Mercury and the moon is still kind of dance with Pluto today. So we're all going to be collectively talking about the necessary changes that we need to be making. The moon represents the collective. So today we're going to be kind of chattering about, this needs to end, I'm kind of sick of this, and we're feeling like we're really kind of racking our brain about really having those deep conversations that maybe is kind of addressing, the elephant in the room or the skeletons in the closet. Having a really prominent, Pluto transit does definitely bring up the need for psychological exploration, self-discovery, a deeper understanding of our own motivations. And so crisis can serve as, the necessary vehicle for kind of getting us to where we need to go on an evolutionary scale. It can wake the soul up, likely through deaths and, shocks and surprises and things that kind of come out of the blue. Especially being in the sign of Aquarius. When I think of Aquarius, I think about the fact that, this particular change that's going on is getting us all to think about freedom, right? Pluto is in the sign of Aquarius, associated with Uranus. This is about the truth. This is about rebellion. This is about breaking free. And I think reminding all of us that, if we really genuinely want to have freedom, what must end, what must kind of leave our lives, what is needing to kind of go, or what do we need to have taken away from us in order to have this freedom. So that's really how that's being expressed in that sign. The second word that comes up for me, or kind of the second process or the second step of Pluto, would be pressure. Right? So everybody who's gone through a Pluto transit, you felt the pressure, right? Like the frog kind of being in the boiling pot before he realizes that he's being boiled. And it can, lead to moments of just massive release, which can bring relief, obviously, but massive release. This pressure is known to be rather intense and create intense experiences, especially surrounding the themes of Pluto, like death and regeneration. Pluto rules over intense emotions and psychological insights, but also profound spiritual and mystical experiences. So individuals who are going through a Pluto transit may have the capacity for emotional depth and resilience at that time that they may not necessarily have known that they had. I think about Pluto transits in my own life, and a lot of them were not always necessarily marked with a physical death, but in other ways, death did kind of make itself known, and it was the ending of a job or a living situation or a relationship, a phase in my life, which usually came about with some kind of crisis. But really that pressure that was building for some time, it was always kind of there. It just wasn't until a particular conjunction or another aspect that really brought that to the surface. Now, if we have the psychological wake up, we experience the pressure, that's then leading us to the purge. So Pluto is associated, believe it or not, with the reproductive organs, but also the bowels, anything that's being able to kind of release stuff from the lower kind of chakras of our body. So when I think about Scorpio and purging, I think of these things. I also think about the association to Scorpio and how it really focuses on intensity and passion and the ability to dive deep into, places and topics and experiences that is not necessarily meant for everybody. Pluto is not a fluffy kind of experience. Generally, it gives us, like I said, some shocks and surprises, especially being in the sign of Aquarius. Now, Pluto is known as the modern ruler of Scorpio. The traditional ruler of Scorpio is Mars. And while they have similar energies, Scorpio is associated with the feminine side of Mars. So Pluto's connection is about what we're really opening up to, what we're receiving, what we're kind of perceiving or picking up, right? Pluto rules over things like x-rays and lie detectors and other things where we're able to kind of read between the lines and really kind of get to the truth. But in order to get to the truth, it's necessary for us to kind of clear out all of the crap, right? Before we can really kind of hit reset. And so I think about through Pluto transits in my own life that I have literally felt like I was having to kind of dig out all of the rot in a certain area of my life with my own hands. And obviously, you know, Pluto transits can bring up these moments that feel like horrific, that we're having to relive events or that we're having to talk about things that have happened to us, or maybe we're kind of faced with our own mortality in some certain situations. But the purge is necessary to clean out all of the gunk so that way we can be reborn. Scorpio and Pluto have associations with several archetypes. We see, you know, the scorpion, we see the eagle, we see the phoenix. Certainly these all represent different energies of the Pluto process and how we go from, you know, maybe feeling threatened by, you know, dealing with the shadow side, and we throw our stinger up like Scorpio does. But then we move on to this evolutionary shift where we are, you know, reborn, and we're able to kind of get that higher vantage point and become the eagle. And then finally evolving to the phoenix, which goes to that never-ending cycle of death and rebirth. And while it kind of goes into flames and turns into ashes, it continues that cycle and it continues to kind of come back. So it teaches us a lot about process of change, you know, where endings make way for new beginnings. And I have gotten to the point, at least in my life, when I'm experiencing really strong Pluto transits, that when I start to see the ending or I start to see something breaking down, I've learned not to like resist it. I've learned to kind of look at it and go, okay, I know what's going on here. It's making room for something new. You know, don't fight the change. Even though so many people who go through Pluto transits, you know, you'll want to white knuckle it, you'll want to resist. And the one thing I'll tell you is that that leads to this increased pressure, right? You're going to keep feeling this pressure that's going to come up until inevitably either something is taken away from you or you make the conscious decision to say, this ends here. And only then you can kind of start that renewal process. Now, my next P would be purification, right? And so purification in all ways, shapes, and forms. You know, I think about this rebirth and renewal theme because Pluto is connected with the concept of death and rebirth. It represents that cyclical nature of life and the idea that out of destruction, new life can emerge. So the theme of this is really about regeneration and the transformative process of making way for what's new. I've seen it a million times in client sessions where, you know, I'll experience somebody who's going through a Pluto transit in the 4th and a parent dies, and then months later, you know, a baby is born. The synchronicity behind these transits are just like crazy. You know, I'll see clients that'll end relationships and, you know, get separated or they'll divorce. And then, you know, months later, they end up through that, you know, renewal process. They go through this purification and then they end up kind of meeting somebody who was like destined to be their partner. So the purification process is like amazing. And, you know, if you're somebody who's into like detoxes and cleanses, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, the whole process of detoxing off the sugar or off the foods that you know that you shouldn't be eating, or maybe quitting smoking, or anything that we know that is that thing that we cling on to for safety and security. And even though we know that it's not good for us, once we give it up, right, and we go through the detox process, it's like we feel like a completely different person. And so with that does come sometimes some very uncomfortable things. You know, I think of, you know, friends of mine who have recalled and told me stories about going through like withdrawals and like being in rehabilitation programs and telling me about like the night sweats and the terrors that they have when, you know, in their dreams, or that they have all of this trauma and all these things that are coming up. But once they go through it, once they've gone through that process of purifying and kind of cleansing out their system, it's like they come out and they look like a completely different person physically, but also just energetically. You can tell that there's that shift because they've removed and kind of expelled what they have been holding on to and what they've been really afraid to face. So the purification process can be amazing, and I think that it can also be something that is so incredibly rewarding. Now that leads me to the next piece, or at number 5 if you're keeping track, and this is about perseverance. Really, I think about the theme of destruction and rebuilding, and how Pluto is connected to destruction, and it encourages almost like this dismantling of old structures, whether this is like physical, emotional, psychological, and essentially, yes, it's paving the way for something new, but it teaches you that you get up and you keep going, right? Even though you're feeling like you're getting probably punched in the gut or kind of kicked in the face by Pluto, it teaches us to continue to rise, to move through that, to persevere. And so within that process, I think that that's also part of like that renewal where you're finding strengths inside of yourself, maybe that you didn't know that you have. Maybe it really kind of teaches you, you know what, I've come this far, I'm just going to continue on, I'm just going to finish this really kind of difficult process of ending or letting go of something. And in the end, ultimately, I think it makes you stronger. I can't tell you how many times I've personally had Pluto transits and also had, clients that I've spoken to that they get right to the end, and something really amazing happens, usually right when you're seeing the final pass of a Pluto transit. So, Pluto will conjunct it, retrograde over, they're integrating whatever grief they're feeling or whatever changes they've made, and then Pluto comes back for the final hit. And then it's like, okay, there is this awareness that's like, I did it. I crossed the finish line. I was able to kind of survive that kind of moment in my life. And I think that that's really one of the main purposes of Pluto, is to kind of teach you that whatever doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And then finally, the last P for me would be power, right? So power and control. Now we know that these are themes that are associated with Pluto in a positive or in a negative sense, because Pluto is linked to power and control, and especially being in a Saturn-based sign, the dynamics of authority seem to kind of come up a lot, and it signifies the ability to undergo power struggles and potential empowerment through facing and overcoming challenges. So Pluto's influence can, bring about a sense of personal empowerment and mastery in certain areas of our life, and ultimately makes us realize that we are actually in control. So many times through Pluto transits, I have found that the very thing that you're afraid of is generally what Pluto gives you. So the one bit of advice that I would give you, and I'll give you many in this video, but one of the main ones is be cautious about looking at the transits in your chart and where Pluto is and the aspect that it's making to a planet. I want you to take note of what comes to mind for you. I've seen people go through a Pluto in the 7th house transit and they go, oh my God, is my partner gonna die? And I'm always really quick to say, we don't go there. Because likely, I'm not saying that's what will manifest. For some, certainly it can, but we don't want to be kind of taunting Pluto and saying to Pluto, like, here's this thing that I'm afraid of. Because likely what you're going to see is that Pluto will then kind of respond by offering that to you on a silver platter. Astrology, can it manifest literally? Yes, it can. But many times what I've noticed with Pluto, because he has a little bit of like a trickster energy, is that he's going to work more in, like a metaphorical sense. It's not going to be literal. Whereas some people have gone through a Pluto in the 7th house transit and they lose a spouse, I've seen many others, stand by their partner while they go through a period of personal crisis or physical transformation, or they're beating like a potentially life-threatening disease, only to come out stronger in the relationship in the end. Okay, so don't jump to conclusions, don't assume the worst, and really know your chart so you have a better understanding of the aspects that Pluto is making. Especially when you're looking at a chart that may be undergoing a Pluto conjunction, I would say, yes, there's going to be a lot of, focus and pressure in that one particular area of your chart, but where are you getting support? Where Pluto might be conjuncting a planet, it may also be trining something in another house natally or with a transiting planet that can help open that up more. It may also be sextiling a natal planet in another house where it's almost kind of preparing you and prepping you for inevitably a Pluto transit through that part of your chart if you're lucky enough to live that long. Obviously, Pluto transits last for a very long time. Now, more on Pluto and Aquarius, like I said, for me, something that's been coming up so much, and I think it's really reverberating through the collective right now. We're going to see this over the next couple of days as we see this new moon in Aquarius with a Mercury, Pluto conjunction. We're going to be seeing, soon Mars is going to enter into Aquarius as well. Venus is going to enter into Aquarius. All of these planets are meeting with Pluto. And it got me thinking, I was like, it's almost like all of these planets are having to go literally and sit at the table, in the underworld with Pluto, and he is, giving them some type of information, or he's offering them some kind of a deal, and he's giving them some kind of insight on, this is the change that's coming. And in the sign of Aquarius, I think it's going to be about, okay, I'm going to give you the information. I'm going to give you the knowledge. It's up to you to do with what you're going to do with it. So even if you're not going through a Pluto transit, certainly the next couple of weeks is going to be very colorful in your life, because you're really starting to think about how you look at freedom, right? Because Aquarius is so much associated with freedom because of that Uranus connection. Uranus wants liberation. But really, like, what is it all about? Like, how are we, through some of these transits, really opening the door and creating the space for our future? That's really what this is about. For Pluto to be able to better work with us and help us learn how to release things that really don't serve our goals, our wishes, right? Our future. To discover the truth and to surrender to freedom and what freedom genuinely really looks like in our life. So sit with that, think about that. I would say that it may be opening the door and making you realize that in order to have freedom, some things have to change, to be able to make something else emerge in your life. I get the impression that there's something that's dramatically changing in the Aquarius area of your chart to make room for what's coming in the Taurus area of your chart, because of the associations and the squares that we're also seeing to Taurus. Now, more on some personal planetary transits. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Pluto, visiting the natal placements in the chart. This may correlate also. You may feel some of this is true if you have some of these conjunctions natally in your natal chart. Maybe you're experiencing some of this in your progressions. So really, a lot of this can really be used a variety of different ways. I'm going to talk about how Pluto transiting that particular planet can kind of play out, what it feels like. I'm going to give you some of the archetypal people that may show up, or some of the themes that you may see kind of happening throughout that particular transit. Obviously, you're going to have to see what house it's taking place in for it to make sense. So do consider really learning your houses, or talking to an astrologer, especially if you're undergoing a personal Pluto transit. I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Especially because I feel like I've been through so many, and I'll show you guys my chart in just a second. I'll pull it up so you can see that. So let's talk first about, Pluto transits that are going on involving the natal sun. Okay, so this is if you have any personal placements, I would say 28 degrees of Capricorn through about 4 degrees of Aquarius. So if your sun is there, right, if you're born somewhere around the end of January, you are experiencing a Pluto transit to your sun. And like I said, it can last anywhere from about 1 to 3 years, depending on the retrograde motion. For me, Pluto coming into a transit with the sun, I think is about a transformation of identity. I think that's one of the biggest themes that I see with that particular transit. I do think it brings about significant transformation to your core identity and self-expression. And you may undergo a profound sense of personal evolution and, shedding old layers of yourself and emerging with a renewed sense of purpose. The sun is the ego, right? And the ego is like one of the things that does not want to die. So certainly, seeing Pluto go through the sign that is opposite of Leo, which is about the sun, certainly is interesting, because you already are kind of dealing with a tricky placement if you have an Aquarius sun. I do feel like this can be also like really getting to the core of who am I, right? What makes me happy? What do I create? What is my identity? And likely this is going to come along with some kind of personal identity crisis. You might start asking yourself, who am I in the sea of the crowd of people? Or who am I in regards to, this evolution that's going on in the collective? A lot of it can also be connected to your career. I've seen a lot of people when they go through a Sun-Pluto transit really going through this like harsh awakening and kind of realizing that maybe they've become so immersed with their identity in regards to their career that, for whatever reason, their career ends, or they switch jobs, or they get let go. And then it's like, well, who am I if I'm not doing this thing out of the world? And obviously the ego can kind of take a hit with that, right? That can be really scary when all of a sudden you're having to figure out who you are outside of something else. Now, obviously in Aquarius, it may mean, how you're going through personal changes to your goals, or how you're going through personal changes to your relationship with friends. That may be another one that kind of pops up for you. Obviously, power dynamics come up with this as well, because Pluto conjunct the sun is going to bring up some issues relating to power and control in general. And you may experience power struggles or confrontations that challenge your sense of authority and personal power. I mean, it goes without being said, Pluto transits can sometimes be quite brutal or dangerous. I have seen, people go through transits where they do sometimes lose their life. I'm not saying everybody, but I've seen it. Or come, close to like a near-death experience, or they die and they come back, or, maybe they have some kind of personal health crisis, or there is some kind of involvement with, shadowy figures or, dangerous people. Sure, that can happen. But I think it's more about really power dynamics and, questioning what or who has power over you and what you're going to do about that, and how you're going to learn to kind of supersede this particular transit and kind of take your power back. Now, solar figures, right? So when I think of like the sun, I think of father figures, I think of bosses, I think of husbands, men, and like I said, power, joy, creativity, and purpose. So for the sake of this, I'll just go ahead. I'll throw up my chart so you guys can see my chart, full disclosure, and you can see what this looks like. So this is my natal chart. I'm a Libra rising, Scorpio sun, Aries moon. I was born on 11/11/89, and I am using the Placidus housing system for my chart. So this is where sometimes I show my chart to other astrologers and they gasp. Okay, so this is why I kind of feel entitled to make a video about Pluto conjunctions. As you guys can see, I was born with the stellium of planets in Scorpio. I have Mars, Lilith, Pluto, Sun, and Mercury. And in particular, my Pluto, Sun, Mercury are conjunct. But Mars isn't too far off from that. So I kind of consider Mars, being pretty close. Currently undergoing Pluto square my Mars. So I'm starting to kind of now grasp the effects of a Pluto-Mars transit, but more on that later. So for me, having a chart with Pluto in conjunction to my sun, well, certainly there's been a lot of second house themes, right? It's in my second house. I think about how, when Pluto transited my sun, I was really little. And certainly I watched like my dad go through like a really difficult time where he was struggling a lot, financially and also psychologically, because there was like a separation of my parents. And it went on for a couple of years. But I really started to see how, for me, it was bringing up issues revolving around personal safety, security, what I needed to feel safe, who I could and could not feel safe around. And coincidentally, it also kind of went hand in hand with the Mercury transit. So it's gonna have some other flavors, but just focusing more on the sun, it was definitely this feeling that I was afraid of, not having what I needed in order to feel safe. And I think that was like a big theme for me. Obviously, the sun rules my 11th house, so it can be about being very fixated on my goals. And so I do know that about myself. I know that, there's been times where I will fixate on something for a long period of time, and then many years later, it kind of like, transpires quite literally according to like what I was wishing for. And so it can take a long time, but I've learned that when my will is involved in making something happen, I can will things into existence. I can make things happen. I also think that with the Pluto Sun conjunction just natally, I mean, I've definitely had my fair share of ego issues, especially revolving around what I can produce, what I can own, how much money I can make, how secure that is. And it's pretty safe to say that the Saturn-Uranus square has just like kind of kicked my ass the last couple of years in a really good way. And it's really taught me that I can't be attached to those things, that the fixation about having some sense of power or control over a situation doesn't necessarily serve me all of the time. And like being really fixated on, needing to make sure that something goes a certain way or needing to have something for security doesn't necessarily bring me security. It can be a false sense of security. So yeah, that's kind of like my hot take on it. I feel like having the conjunction to my sun, my entire life, it's this constant regeneration of what are my goals and, what am I building and what am I creating? obviously, you know, the second house comes with like a real fixation with second house things. So it's not just about, you know, having money or having status. It can also be about growing things. It can be about food. It can be about, you know, art and resources. I'm a collector. That's something that I do. If I get really into something, I'll collect things. And that's kind of what we see sometimes with the second house. We can see some hoarding tendencies. But for me, it's always been things that are more esoteric, metaphysical stuff. I have a lot of like taxidermy stuff that I like, obviously Scorpio. I have a lot of books. I collect a lot of books. I collect a lot of tarot cards, things that are very kind of Sun Pluto, things that allow me to really go through this process of better understanding myself and like seeing changes within myself. So obviously, you know, I love divination. Anyway, I think that's enough on the Sun Pluto conjunction. Let me know if you have that conjunction. I'd love to hear from you. And, you know, if you're going through that also, let me know how you're faring with that. Now we're going to move on to the moon. So if you're going through a Pluto moon transit, okay, so once again, 28 degrees of Aquarius to about 28 degrees of Capricorn to about 4 degrees of Aquarius. If you're undergoing a Pluto moon transit, well, really, I think the theme of this is emotional depth, right? I have seen a lot of clients who are born with the moon Pluto conjunction or who are going through that transit. One of the biggest themes that I see is with Pluto's influence on the moon, it definitely intensifies emotional experiences, right? And so where the sun is more external, it's, you know, who you are and how people see you and what you have, and it's kind of your will. The moon is sometimes more, right? It's meant to be kind of like subliminal. It's something that only comes out at nighttime. It's more hidden, it's subconscious, and it brings about profoundly intense emotional experiences. And so you may find that you're grappling with, throughout this transit, some deep-seated emotions, and you're undergoing like a major emotional purge and confronting unresolved issues from the past. Now, when we think about this, the moon can represent our subconscious, it can represent our home, our relationship with our lineage, our ancestors, the past, but also like mother figures. So it's not unusual that I'll see a Pluto moon transit where somebody is saying, well, you know, my mom's undergoing, you know, some kind of breast, you know, cancer treatment, or, you know, I am completely gutting and renovating my house. I mean, these are very moon Pluto transits. And what that stirs up, okay? So that's the other thing, is that it doesn't necessarily mean that our, you know, home has to be destroyed. Pluto is the destroyer, but it can mean that sometimes through changes that are going on either in the home or in the family, it stirs things up for us emotionally, things that we didn't know was there. I think of like one of my favorite Pluto moon transits. I've got a client who was undergoing like a Pluto transit, and it was aspecting her moon, and Pluto was going through the fourth house. And I remember saying to her, "You're gonna get this house," and I said, "You're gonna renovate the house." It was like an old home in I think it's Scotland. It's like a castle. And I said, "But you're gonna start having issues with paranormal things when Pluto starts opposing your moon, and you're gonna see that it's gonna be something that's gonna kind of freak you out." 2 years go by, she finishes the renovation, she calls me, she goes, "I need a priest. Can you send me a priest? Like, do you know of anybody?" And I was like, "What's going on?" And she goes, "The house is having all kinds of weird, you know, paranormal activity." And I said, "It's because you stirred stuff up in the house during the Pluto transit." So even though it wasn't any crisis that happened, you know, the home was fine. She put a lot of work and obviously money and energy into it, but the process of deconstructing the house and breaking it down and moving things around clearly disrupted the spirits. So upon moving into the home with Pluto in opposition to her moon, she felt like she was being hit by this really intense invisible force that was literally pushing her out of her home. She felt very emotionally uncomfortable, right? Anyway, family dynamics, right? This is something that we definitely see with Pluto transits. Family dynamics being, you know, subject to transformation, including issues relating to power, control, emotional bonds, relationships with mother figures, or issues relating to nurturing may be emphasized. I think of another common trend that I've seen with transits in recent years with Pluto on the moon, and I've seen women who get pregnant and they go through, you know, Pluto on their moon and having to work through all of these obviously hormones and emotions, but things that come up with their relationship to their mothers or their grandmothers, or broken relationships, or things that they've kind of suppressed that they didn't work out until they were pregnant, right? And they're in this moment of going, my body is like regenerating, everything is kind of like changing, and like now there's this new life coming in, and also needing to emotionally process that the old life is like changing. And so I've seen a lot of people go through that. Once again, like I said, Pluto's the only real Pluto conjunction I haven't had was really with my moon and also Jupiter, but Jupiter aspects Pluto in my chart. So I can only speak to the square. So it's a little bit different, but I did see a lot of like Pluto moon themes at the time. I think about when Pluto was squaring my moon a couple years ago, and yeah, that was probably one of the worst transits that I've been through, to be honest with you. So it may be harder. I think the square may be harder than the conjunction. It definitely did manifest as a lot of the Pluto moon stuff, though. So it was in the 4th house, and it was squaring my Aries moon in the 7th. At the time, it was a final kind of disconnection from the relationship with my mom. I mean, it literally kind of cut and severed the way Mars aspects would. And it manifested as more like liberation for me. So it was more kind of like, okay, I don't have to continue the same emotional patterns. I don't have to see those play out in relationships. And it gave me the opportunity, I think, through that really difficult Pluto transit to transmute all of that and kind of say, okay, I'm going to do things differently. And it did manifest more in Pluto in the 4th house, where I was, making a decision to kind of relocate from Los Angeles to go somewhere else. And in the process of like moving and kind of putting all of that stuff together, it did some interesting things. Even though I hadn't been in contact with my mom from the beginning of the Pluto transit, towards the end of the Pluto transit, about 2 years later, while I was moving, I was actually receiving kind of contact from my mom, and my mom was like trying to kind of smooth things over and make amends. So could it have been through the willingness to move? Maybe. I think about how Pluto in the 4th house may have said you absolutely have to kind of move, and once you move, then it's going to allow this purification process, and then it can really open the moon up more. And it did a number of different ways. It didn't just do that in terms of my relationship with my mom. My other relationships also kind of grew as a result of making some of those changes. So let me know, have you guys gone through like a Pluto moon conjunction? Were you born with that? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that. Once again, when you're working with Pluto moon contacts, you want to watch for women, trauma, difficult situations with women, but also therapists can come in, healers can come in, intuitive psychics can come in. And this has a strong connection to women, mothers, motherhood, home roots, ancestors, and home. Now we're going to move to the Ascendant. Okay, so this is not a planet, but it's really important because I'm sure there's a lot of really late degree Capricorn or early degree Aquarius risings watching this video, and you're like, what is Pluto crossing my Ascendant going to do? Well, you're going to get your passport stamped to go to hell and back. So there's that. But the Ascendant and the angles of the chart in general are very, very, very strong. Okay, so these are strong entry points, and when they are activated through a conjunction or square or an opposition, you really see the pressure emerge in terms of transforming something about that particular angle through the energy of the sign. So for example, a Pluto transit to the Ascendant likely will go hand in hand with a radical transformation in your appearance, maybe your personality, how you present yourselves to the world, and it can involve shedding old habits and relationships or self-perceptions, right? That's another way that this can kind of manifest. Have I seen people adopt like a radical new wardrobe, or decide that they want to go goth, or that they want to dye their hair, or decorate their home in crushed velvet? Yes, I've seen that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how that always manifests. We may see that there's significant transformations. I think of clients who have lost 50, 60, 70 pounds and then decided that they wanted to, suddenly get into weightlifting. And then next thing we know, the Pluto transit is, kind of leaving their Ascendant. And now all of a sudden they're going into like, bodybuilding competitions. I mean, amazing things I've seen I'm talking more Capricorn people. But I've seen this with some Capricorn people who have gone through this significant transformation, and it's really been showing their personal power, their endurance, and their strength, right? For Aquarius, it might be a little bit of a different flavor. This could be more in regards to, you guys really kind of getting in touch with, your personal power, especially because, you know, Pluto rules your 10th house of career. So it can be a really prominent time where you're feeling like you're becoming the boss, or you're taking your power back, or you're learning to kind of empower yourself and be more assertive and to be welcoming change. You could be becoming, you know, a new parent. You could be relocating. You could be, you know, become an entrepreneur. And certainly a little more weird and wacky. I could see like Pluto and Aquarius on your ascendant as being kind of like this, futuristic, kind of modern style that's kind of coming through. And it can be a little bit more like intense. Certainly Pluto has like a reputation for, you know, things that are dark and kind of delicate, or a lot of people will say kind of like vampire aesthetic. But not always. I think in Aquarius, it's more like matrixy, right? I think we're going to see more of like this kind of modern 1990s kind of style influence on what we're wearing now. So there's like this kind of like weird like cyberpunk stuff, right? That I think is going to start becoming a little bit more prominent in a sense of style. Now, take into consideration also, when Pluto's on your ascendant, you know, it's opposing your descendant. So certainly relationships change because it's aspecting your 7th house. So it can bring intense transformative personal experiences which impact your relationship with other people. And so power dynamics with other people might be a focal point. You know, other people might attract or be attracted or drawn to your profound, you know, transformation. And so it can bring a lot of people in, but it can also be the sense of needing to kind of reassess relationships now that you're kind of wielding your power in a different way. I've experienced Pluto square my ascendant, so I can't speak to the conjunction. Was not a fan of the Pluto square personally, but that was Pluto going into my 4th house, and that was more about like, you know, relocating and moving from where I was born in Tucson, Arizona. I lived there for, you know, 14 years before I picked up and I moved to Los Angeles. But I do distinctly remember, you know, Pluto with that square to my ascendant, that it manifested as a complete change in my personal style. You know, you would think that, you know, Libra rising is this very, you know, kind of blonde or very feminine and, you know, kind of balanced, pleasing appearance. And I remember going through this Pluto transit where I was die hard, loved the emo music, loved all of that, that whole like scene movement. It was just like my thing, you know, from I want to say, yeah, about 1999 to maybe around 2000, my music, you know, preferences changed a lot. And I went from having, you know, long kind of blonde-ish hair to dyeing my hair black, to wearing heavy makeup, changing my hair, got my nose pierced, you know, started doing all that stuff. And it was while Pluto was in a square to my ascendant. And I felt like that was more Pluto coming in, challenging that old identity, and also feeling like that may also enhance the likelihood of me maybe fitting in with where I was living with Pluto through my 4th house. But I haven't had it on my ascendant. I can only speak to seeing a lot of really powerful transformations in my clients as they go through that transit. The one thing that you want to be mindful of, though, with Pluto on the ascendant is that, you know, especially if there's other indications in the chart where there can be health issues, you know, you want to be mindful of that. The body is regenerating, so you need a lot of water, you know, and anything that you can really do to support your cells as you're going through this regenerative process. Yeah, you can be seen as somebody who's a little bit more intense as you go through that transit. So I don't have any real archetypes, but I will tell you that if it's going through the ascendant, it's you, right? So it's your body, your look, your identity, yourself, your appearance. That's generally what you're going to see transform as you go through this particular transit. Now let's talk about Pluto transiting Mercury. Okay, so if you're having Pluto transit your Mercury, so if you have your Mercury anywhere from 28 degrees of Capricorn to 4 degrees of Aquarius, Pluto will be meeting with Mercury. And this is an interesting transit. This is another one that I was born with, so I can speak to this in a second. But deep insights, right? So deep insights, Pluto's influence on Mercury, the planet of communication and thought, can lead to deep insights and heightened capacity for understanding complex subjects. So you may engage in intense intellectual pursuits, okay? You're going to be super fixated on or obsessive about learning things, about communicating or divination or information or truth, especially in the sign of Aquarius. So you're going to maybe feel like your mind's on fire a little bit. There can be a sense of being a little mischievous. There can be a sense also of getting yourself, into trouble or kind of doom spiraling as you're scrolling. I think of like Mercury being the diviner, somebody who can basically be the oracle and, tell you what may or may not be coming. So it's not unusual with Pluto transits where I do see people get really interested in astrology or tarot or talking to psychics. Like that does come up. Spirit communication, mediumship, especially seances. I've seen that a lot for some people. But Mercury Pluto is just a very, very intense mind, and they can have a very sharp tongue as well with that conjunction. Now, something else that comes to mind is also about empowerment or, struggles that can come up with communication. So there can be a focus on power dynamics within communication. You might experience empowerment through deep emotional connections and face challenges relating to control or possessiveness. So, when we think of Mercury, it is systems, it's communication, it's business, it's traveling, it's learning. So when Mercury and Pluto come into conjunction, we can feel so obsessed or fixated with talking about something or learning something or sharing something. But we may also notice that there is, like I said, a sharpness to our communication style. And so when we're communicating with people, we can feel like we're more defiant, or there can be a sense of having a hard time controlling what we have to say. Certainly it can be a time that can go hand in hand with some mental struggles or, some intense issues that are coming up revolving around communication with other people. Having the Mercury-Pluto conjunction, Pluto hit my Mercury very shortly after my sun. And Mercury in my chart, it rules the 12th house. So for me, I have all these planets that are kind of conjunct the 12th house ruler. So obviously I do some kind of like metaphysical kind of, divining, but also like one foot in one world, one foot in the other, especially in Scorpio. And this was a time where when I was a kid, I was probably about between 2 and 5 years old, and I had constant reoccurring nightmares. And so now being an astrologer as an adult, I can kind of see why that was happening. But full-on visitations from things, full-on visitations from things that were not of this world. Having conversations with, ghosts or apparitions or spirits, if you believe in that stuff, regularly, like reoccurring for several years. And to some extent, it still happens sometimes, not as much anymore. As I got older, I started to kind of realize what it was and the fact that, little kids are really open and they're really sensitive. And so it's much easier for them to kind of see and, have visits from the other side. But it was happening at night and it was scary and I was a little kid. And I remember relaying a lot of this information to my parents and also like to my dad and telling my dad things and telling both of my parents things that there's no way I would have known. And whether this was about, people that I was connecting with and communicating with who were deceased relatives, dreams that I was having that was like kind of forecasting stuff that ultimately ended up happening in the family, and the list goes on. So I feel like the Mercury-Pluto transit for me manifested more as becoming aware that there was something else out there other than just me. And obviously dealing with the dark, it was in Scorpio. Very different energy than Aquarius, but still nevertheless, that's definitely when I really started getting very interested in things that were kind of mystical and magical. I remember watching like The Little Mermaid when I was a kid and like not being fascinated by like, Ariel. I was like, yeah, I want to be the sea witch, right? I mean, some of you guys are going to cackle as you listen to this, but really kind of having that interest in some of the villains or some of the darker, kind of characters that were kind of coming up in some of the movies that I was watching as a kid, and having an interest in that archetype of, the mystical, the magical, the witchy. And a lot of it obviously came through film because Mercury rules my 12th house. Obviously, getting older, the second house deals with personal style. So it's no surprise some of my favorite things are kind of black or lacy or things that have some kind of connection to dark humor or skeletons. That's definitely come through a lot of my personal style, and it's a reflection of some of my favorite horror movies or things that are a little bit more connected to illusion, stuff that's sheer, things that you can kind of see through because of Mercury's connection to the 12th house. But for the most part, I mean, as an adult now, I think it's definitely played a huge role in my interest in learning, in education, in continuing, my studies, really feeling like I want to have the reference books and the things that I can kind of go back and go through. And it leads me also sometimes into hours-long research of just reading things and kind of connecting the dots and putting the pieces together to better understand what's going on out in the world as I create some of these videos. So really, it's made me just like a really keen researcher, right? All right, so let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about Venus. Obviously, everybody cringes a little bit when they hear the Venus-Pluto transit. So Venus, which rules love and romance, relationships, this is a particularly intense transit. So as Pluto and Venus come into conjunction, so if you have anything around 28 degrees of Capricorn through 4 degrees of Aquarius, if your Venus is there, Pluto is transiting your Venus. So this will bring about intense relationship lessons. Pluto-Venus transits can signify intense and transformative experiences in relationships, and you may go through significant changes in your values, preferences, or attractions. This is also a lot about empowerment or struggle in relationships. So there can be a focus on power dynamics in relationships, and you might experience empowerment through deep emotional connections or face changes relating to control or possessiveness. So this is a difficult one. Pluto, Venus, you got to look at the other aspects. You got to look at the house. Can it materialize as the death of a relationship? Sure, it could, but not necessarily. Sometimes I see Pluto-Venus transits materialize as somebody having this awakening about what it is they truly value and what they want. Or maybe they've hit a crisis moment in terms of like their debt usage and their spending, and they recognize that they have to make a huge shift in regards to how they're actually, spending their money, and kind of come to the end of the road in terms of a financial situation. I have seen it manifest as some particularly messy relationship stuff, obviously affairs and, people being unfaithful or not being devoted. Yeah, that can happen with a Venus-Pluto transit. But I've also seen that with any Pluto transit, whatever kind of dies off or is taken away likely wasn't supposed to be there to begin with. It was going to kind of hinder you or inhibit you from really being able to kind of embody the real true lessons of Venus, which is about love and, relationship and, feeling like you have somebody who really can stand by your side and commit to you. So they're not all the same. It really depends. I will say that a Venus-Pluto transit can be periods, if you have other aspects going on, like involving Jupiter, that can be profound changes for your finances. Like I've seen people go through Pluto-Venus transits and find out that they're inheriting millions of dollars. Or maybe they made an investment, years prior, and then all of a sudden it hits and then they've got a ton of wealth, because Pluto is about wealth. Right? And it can be about things that kind of come from darker things. So sure, I've seen a number of clients go through all kinds of scandals in love, or, finding that, their partner is addicted to porn, or that they are, undergoing a period of, traumatic release, because they're realizing that, they have not been, they haven't healed a broken heart, and they're currently in a relationship with someone. So there's a number of different ways that it can play out. I will say that with this particular transit, you want to watch, because Venus can literally be a woman. So in my mind, when I'm looking at wives, I think of like Juno or the moon. Okay, that's usually wives in a man's chart. But Venus can be seen as the other woman sometimes. So can Lilith. We can see both of those archetypes as being the other woman. So even though Venus rules love, there is also this kind of lusty side that comes through, or having big breakthroughs in your sexuality and, being more authentic in how you express yourself sexually, or exploring new things with a partner. Personally, yeah, especially in Aquarius, I think like, Pluto coming in conjunction with, a Venus in Aquarius, it can manifest literally as a Scorpio or a Plutonian person coming into your life and totally radically changing the way that you look at love. But it can also be because, Aquarius is about the future, and it can be about groups and wishes. where you're starting to kind of change the way that you look at relationships. And so I have seen some clients already going through this transit that are opting to like open up their marriage, or they're choosing a polyamorous lifestyle, or they are choosing to be more open about the fact that they, identify a certain way, or they're coming out of the closet as being, gay or bisexual. So I've seen a lot of that with the Aquarius transit. I had the Pluto Venus transit. Obviously, keep in mind, I got 2 stelliums here, so I was hit by one Pluto transit after another. But I remember having the Pluto Venus transit, and when that transit happened, it did manifest in a lot of the traditional kind of textbook ways. It was a relationship that ended. It was a relationship of somebody who I was in a relationship with for about 4 years. We did live together, so it was in the 4th house, and we were engaged, and he was unfaithful. I mean, it's as simple as that. And it was actually really kind of sticky as well, obviously, because Venus was my chart ruler. But when Pluto hit that, it's interesting that it really kind of activated my Placidus 3rd house. And it was something actually that I found. It was a piece of paper that I found that kind of led me into my Scorpio, I guess, like detective moments, and realizing that there was an affair that was going on. I found like a receipt in my ex's pant pocket, and it had like a receipt from going out to dinner, and it was like on a day that he was supposed to be at work, and it was for him and another person. There was 2 people that were on the receipt. If you've waited tables, you'll see how many, parties are at the table. So I was like, this doesn't make sense. And then started kind of connecting the dots, and then took it upon myself to go and look through the phone account, which I shouldn't have done, but whatever. And I went and looked at this time, I don't know if you can still do this because we had a joint account, but you could see ingoing and outgoing messages. So the irony is that the day that this was happening was when it was my birthday. And so I could see that there were text messages going back and forth between 2 phone numbers. And I was like, what is this? And then I put 2 and 2 together with the receipt. I'm like, he's seeing somebody else. So I picked up my phone, right? Pluto rules my Placidus 3rd, called the number, and a girl picked up. And the irony is that it was one of my friends. That I was going to high school with. So, whatever happened. We broke up, moved out. It was a really traumatic breakup. It was really messy, and family got involved. But it's interesting that Pluto is conjunct my sun, and that my sun rules my 11th house. And it was a friend that I went to high school with, and she was a Leo. And fun fact, they ended up getting married. And I finally years later just kind of got over it. But he still cheats on her, and I hear about it through other friends. And every time I think about this transit, I'm like, oh, I feel bad for her, to be really honest with you. So that was my Pluto Venus transit. Let me know if you've been through one of those. I don't think you have to go through a Pluto Venus transit to get cheated on, but certainly that was an interesting time to kind of go through. All right, so let's talk about Mars and Pluto transiting a natal Mars. Okay, so this is particularly potent. Mars is associated obviously with, getting to where we want to go. It can be about our passion or our energy or vitality. It can be about anger or frustration. So if you have your Mars anywhere from the late degrees of Capricorn, like 28 degrees, to about 4 degrees of Aquarius, Pluto's transiting your Mars right now. And I'll go out on a limb here, but I have seen that the Capricorn placements, especially if you have Mars in Capricorn, because it's exalted, you're faring a little bit better. So it may be easier for you, I don't know, let me know, than some of the Aquarius Mars placements. But when Pluto transits Mars, this brings about an intense drive and ambition, right? We think about Pluto's obsession and focus and the need to kind of change something, and Mars. And both of these planets have associations with Scorpio. So when these two come together, the planet of action and desire and the planet of transformation, it amplifies your drive and ambition. There is like nothing getting in your way. You're like, eyes on the prize. I'm not giving this up. Determination like times 1,000. So you may pursue your goals with like an unwavering determination and passion. And so I think that can be a positive manifestation of the conjunction. Certainly you can see power struggles in action, like that can definitely be a thing. And I think that, power struggles or conflicts in asserting yourself, right? In asserting your needs, your wants. So you might find that you're confronting challenges that test your ability to assert control or transform your approach in achieving goals. And so I think that, for this, man, I think about people who have Pluto Mars aspects and, could they be assassins? Yes, they could, but they also make powerful athletes. They make people who are incredibly gifted when it comes to, military action, amazing when it comes to self-defense, very brave, very courageous, and not kind of backing down. It's a very, very powerful, conjunction to have. I've seen this recently for some clients who have been more focused on self-defense and learning more about self-defense, especially in Capricorn. It's been more about career goals and, professional transformations. And also because Mars has association with Capricorn's 4th house Aries, reaching their goals when it comes to owning their own house, building a house, moving, living alone, and embracing that change. The Aquarius is interesting. I've only seen a few of these so far, and it's been really interesting because just having Mars in Aquarius, you have this energy that's don't tell me what to do, right? Because it's so Uranian. And as Pluto comes in, I've seen a lot of fits of rage. I've seen a lot of people who get really agitated and really upset and are vocalizing and getting angry because they feel like, people aren't speaking truth or that people aren't being independent. So it can be a little bit more difficult having it in that particular sign. Obviously, if you're having that transit, let me know. I'd love to hear how you're faring. But I feel like with this, it's also about, issues related to authority, responsibility that can kind of come up because it's in a Saturn sign. And where you're resisting or fighting against authority, or maybe you're kind of feeling like you want to lead the charge of specific groups or movements or kind of be bringing people together. Now, I haven't had this transit. I have yet to have, obviously, I will never have Pluto conjunct my Mars in transit, but my Mars is within about 11 degrees. So it's close. And because it's a stellium, everything kind of gets mixed up in that particular house anyway. But having Mars and Pluto in Scorpio for me, as I've said to you guys before, it's if there's something that I want, I make it happen. And I've realized that about myself. And sometimes there's this tendency where somebody says you can't do that, or that's not going to work. And those are the magic words for me. That's oh yeah, watch this. And that's how a lot of the things that I have made happen has happened, is from people telling me that you're not going to do anything or it's not going to work. On the other hand, the Mars-Pluto conjunction is extremely volcanic. In Scorpio, it's a little different because it's capable of being able to kind of keep it under wraps until it pops. But still, because I have Mars and Pluto, which, are associated with Scorpio in the same sign in close proximity, when I get mad, I get very mad. And usually it'll get to a point where I get very mad and then I get silent. And so maybe that's the Mars outburst, and then, Pluto kind of shows up. And then when I'm not saying anything, that's probably the maddest that I could be. I laugh when I talk to some of my other astrologer friends about my chart, because I'm yeah, I'm a Scorpio, but I'm really kind of an honorary Taurus. You see that stellium of planets in the 2nd house. I'm really just kind of a Taurus Cancer that just kind of looks like a Scorpio, But certainly I think Mars Pluto does have this sense of, protecting what's yours, defending what's yours. Definitely I've had a tendency to be that's mine, don't touch that. Whether it's a piece of cake or it's a romantic partner, I do know that about myself. And feeling there's a need to defend or kind of protect something. I'm sure Mars-Pluto transits can be transits that can feel violent, that can bring up conflict or, head-on situations with somebody where you're feeling you need to defend yourself. But I think in Aquarius, it's about really looking at it and kind of being where you're able to use that charge of Mars to kind of really inspire other people to also take action. That's really the key there. With Pluto, but certainly Pluto-Mars transit could easily come with a necessary anger management period in your life. So let me know how you guys are doing with that particular transit, if that's what you're experiencing. We're gonna, and one other thing, Mars will show itself archetypally through conflict, men, younger men. It can also be about the self and power or courage. Okay, so that's what you want to be looking for. Okay, so let's talk Pluto transiting natal Jupiter. So if you happen to have your natal Jupiter from 28 degrees of Capricorn to about 4 degrees of Aquarius, Pluto will be coming into a conjunction with your Jupiter. What does that mean? Well, intense growth and transformation. One thing I will say is that this may be a transit that is particularly fortuitous for a number of reasons. So we'll get into it, but definitely intense growth, right? Because Jupiter deals with growth and expanding things. So when you take Pluto's energy, which is about changing and transforming, and then you take Jupiter, which represents expansion, luck, and opportunities, you may have yourself the winning ticket. When these two planets align, it indicates a period of intense growth and also opportunity for fortunate events. You might significantly change your beliefs and your values, and your overall perspective on life might change. I have seen some people go through these transits, especially if it's connected to like the 2nd, the 5th, or the 8th house. It can literally manifest as coming into some kind of money or some kind of wealth. But Aquarius is the energy of knowledge. So it can be a wealth of knowledge. It can also be about transformation of your beliefs or your ideas. So, Jupiter coming into this conjunction, because it represents our philosophies and our ideologies, Pluto is basically visiting saying, I'm going to change the way that you look at your belief system, or I'm going to change the way that you look at culture or education, right? I've seen a lot of people find that what they ultimately want to possess might be more travel or a college education or a master's degree. And it can bring about radical transformation of your belief systems. So if you have been, kind of in a situation where you've been questioning your faith, now you may have that crisis of faith, and long-held beliefs that you've had might kind of die and be reborn, and you might be adopting new perspectives of your worldview as well. Now, this tends to have like a financial effect though, like I said, because Jupiter deals with wealth. It governs over wealth, abundance, and material resources. So Pluto coming into conjunction can bring about significant changes to your financial situation or material possessions. So you might experience major losses or major gains depending on the other aspects in your chart. And it's essential to remain flexible and adaptable in managing your resources. I think of like a particular situation with a client where they were having like a Pluto-Jupiter transit, and it was like, they, lost their job. They kind of were totally down on their luck with the first, Pluto transit to their Jupiter. And then when Pluto was retrograding over Jupiter, they kind of developed like a really strong spiritual practice. Their view of their resources changed. It ended up manifesting with the final pass over their Jupiter as them coming into like an inheritance, and then having, the money to go and like pursue a higher degree, and totally changing, the type of career that they had. Obviously, this was in Capricorn. So little different, especially if you have Jupiter in Capricorn. You've got Jupiter in a position where it can be a little bit more difficult in terms of seeing the positive shifts that have happened with that transit. If you happen to have a natal Jupiter in Capricorn, this went hand in hand with the triple conjunction between Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter. So you might have really seen a significant change in recent years with your job, but it could have also manifested as the beginning of like a new direction in your professional life. Now, if you have Pluto transiting Jupiter in Aquarius, it might mean that there's some wealth that's coming through technology or wealth that's coming through travel. It might mean that, you're really focusing on like manifestation and your goals revolving around money and resources as well. But I think that this also teaches us, obviously, like expansion through crisis. Quite literally, when we put those two planetary energies together, obviously, they may offer a variation of different opportunities for growth and expansion, often through crisis or upheaval. And you're likely going to be forced to confront and overcome obstacles that ultimately lead to greater wisdom, strength, and resilience. So I've seen a lot of people who've had an interest in learning more about life after death with this transit. Finally overcoming fears of like getting on an airplane and traveling somewhere, or overcoming their fears of going back to school and completing a program. I've seen a lot of people that have been very lucky with investments with tech related things with this particular transit. As Pluto's entrance into Aquarius is showing, where there's like a mass amount of wealth that's coming from these new technologies. And if you had like the foresight or the faith in some of these technologies, they've been kind of lucky. Just kind of reflecting, once again, haven't had Pluto transit my natal Jupiter. I've had Pluto opposite my natal Jupiter, and that was with the Saturn Neptune conjunctions. It was a little different. And I think that, you know, for me, whenever I look at aspects between Pluto and Jupiter, it always represents an amassed amount of like wealth. Obviously the conjunction or the trine seems to be a little bit easier when it deals with like coming into money or having some kind of power over resources. But it's usually met first with the ending of one financial situation or transformation of your spending or your overall kind of value system, which makes room for like a new one to kind of come in. Now, trying to think of other examples. I've had people who suddenly inherited money. I think I said that they didn't see coming. I know that Jupiter in some forms of astrology can also be seen as the husband. So that can be really significant transits revolving around husbands if you're a woman. Changes going on with your relationship to your husband. Changes also going on in regards to law and legality. I've seen some pretty wild court battles going on with like a Pluto-Jupiter transit in recent years for clients as well, which likely in Capricorn was kind of long and drawn out. I don't think you're going to see that situation in Aquarius. I think we're going to see that this kind of growth and this awareness of change and what we're learning about change and where we kind of learn to let go, that we bring better things in or things that are kind of more in our path are definitely going to be seen through the Pluto and Aquarius transit. Now, when you're going through this, you want to look for archetypes like teachers, educators, travelers, foreigners. Yes, it can be about wealth, but it can also sometimes be about like education. So something that you're learning, something that's shifting about your philosophy. You might find that you're getting really obsessed with learning about astrology or really into a specific culture or travel. That might be something else that kind of comes up for you throughout that particular transit. If you're having this one, I'd love to hear from you guys. Let me know. Hopefully you're like winning the lottery or something, right? You're hitting the karmic lottery, especially when I think about Saturn's kind of connection to Aquarius. Let's talk about Pluto transiting Saturn. And so there's a number of you guys who are kind of going through that, who have Saturn in Aquarius. So if you guys are some of the ones that have been born kind of in like the mid 1990s, you're experiencing the Pluto-Saturn conjunction right now. Okay, right after a Saturn return. So I know what that's like. All right, so let's talk about that. So a Pluto-Saturn transit, we've got Pluto coming into contact with Saturn. You know, obviously this is going to be about structural changes, right? Because that's what Saturn brings, is structure in our life. So while Pluto transits Saturn, it brings about significant structural changes in one's life that may involve restructuring a career, a long-term goal, or dismantling the old system. We think of Saturn as like the foundation, the cement, the glue, right, that holds things together. And yes, it has associations of, you know, authority figures in our life or sometimes parent relationships or boss relationships. But I think of Saturn as like karma. I also think of Saturn as, you know, what we're here to mature into and to like really learn how to do well. So it might feel like an area where we're a little insecure or we're unsure, but like we actually end up mastering that. So Pluto coming into contact with Saturn can certainly kind of like wake us up and make us aware of where we need to be, you know, taking more conscious steps towards becoming more, you know, grown up or more committed to our natal Saturn. I think also a lot of it is about authority and responsibility, and, you know, issues pertaining to that can come up. So responsibility and control may be at the forefront. We may need to confront and transform our relationship with authority figures and society structures. So this can be a time where it's like you're feeling like a parent or an elder or a boss is just like really on your case. Obviously, you know, if you're experiencing this transit right now, you have Saturn in a Saturn sign. So at least you got that working for you. You know, with Pluto coming into conjunction with that, I do feel like it's going to be a situation where this is about radically changing and transforming the way that you look at your role in society or the way that you look at how your career is evolving. Certainly for a lot of you guys, it's having a big impact, especially with technology. So like where technology is coming in and it's creating some big structural changes in a lot of your careers and how that's really impacting something about your ability to kind of really show up in that way. You know, a little bit of a different flavor because I have a really highly aspected Saturn. Saturn and Neptune are conjunct when I was born and it opposes Jupiter. So there's a lot of things going on here, but Pluto hitting Saturn for me was quite literally like, I would consider probably like one of the rock bottoms for me. And I mean, it was in the 4th house, so that's no surprise. But that was a time where I was like, I hate my job, you know, like I hate my job. I don't want to be doing this type of work anymore. Ironically, I went into, I really studied like, you know, cultural anthropology and like theology. Like I joke and I tell people I really wanted to be a nun. And then when I realized like that wasn't going to work, I was like, well, maybe I can like, you know, go and do like archaeology stuff, or I can curate museums. And then somehow I got sucked into this whole like, that's not a real job. You're not going to be Indiana Jones. Don't do that. That's never going to pay the bills. And a lot of that was actually coming from my relationship with my mom. And so somehow, you know, went in a totally different direction, went and, you know, got my license in the dental field, ended up working in that industry, and then saw, you know, my mom getting up at 6 a.m. every morning and like going to work and hating her life and working in this environment where she was very vocal about the fact that she felt like very unfulfilled and that she didn't do what she wanted to do and that she did very well in school and never really got to like make the most of her life. And after 2 or 3 years of like working in that field and strongly connected to, you know, working and like interning at my mom's office and then, you know, working in other offices, I got sick of like the 9 to 5. I was like, this is not going to work for me. Little did I know, Venus in my 4th, really I was supposed to work from home, but that's neither here nor there. So this was that point in time where I was like, you know what, this is not meant for me in the long run, and I need to make a really big change. So obviously it was conjunct Neptune at the time, so I was not aware of, you know, some kind of purpose was coming in, some kind of home business was coming in, and the opposition to Jupiter made me feel very discouraged because I was like, I know that I can do it, but I don't know if it's going to be successful. But staying on Saturn, it brought a lot of other issues up. It brought up, you know, death of older relatives at that time, you know, when Pluto squared my moon, I lost my grandmother. When Pluto conjuncted my Saturn, my grandfather died. And so both of those transits were really significant for me in my life. And I felt like it was like the beginning of the end in a lot of ways of how the family was kind of being run and like who the authority figures were in the family and like who was in charge now. And now that some of the, you know, matriarchs and patriarchs of the family have transitioned, it was like, okay, well, there are certain people now that are next on the totem pole that certainly are not leading very well. And I had a lot of power struggles to some extent with both of my parents at 2 separate times. What I can tell you about, you know, if you're going through this transit is look at your relationship to authority. Look at your relationship to your career. You know, ask yourself, do you feel like this is what you're meant to be doing? And if there are certain things that are ending, if there's jobs that are ending, if you're not seeing eye to eye with certain superiors or bosses or parents, it doesn't have to be the end of the road. It can just be the end of your karmic story and maybe making the decision that you're not going to follow in suit and do some of the same things, right? Now with Saturn, you want to watch for authority figures, okay? So like I said, superiors, bosses, parents, issues revolving around your status, right? And also what some of your goals are in the long term, what you're hoping to achieve. Pluto might come in and be the destroyer and kind of kick down all those walls and say like, okay, you're meant to do this. So like, I'm gonna, you know, create and kind of clear a path for you. It may feel like it's closing, you know, some doors, but in other ways, it's making it possible for you to really get on the path of what you're here to learn through Saturn's lessons. Let me know, are you going through a Pluto-Saturn transit? I'd love to hear your hot takes on that. Let's talk about Pluto transiting Neptune. Okay, so Pluto transiting Neptune, we're now getting into the kids that were kind of born in the 2000s. So obviously people are getting younger and younger the more that I'm talking about this. Pluto, you know, in this particular transit, I think it's an interesting one. Definitely a lot of spiritual transformations will occur here because of Pluto's influence. It can lead to profound spiritual and mystical experiences. So you may undergo deep transformation in your beliefs, ideals, and connections to the divine, your spiritual life, your religious philosophy and belief systems. It can also be very strongly tied to otherworldly experiences. Stuff involving the darker side, though, of like, you know, substances and alcoholism and addiction that can come up, or illness. And also, I think a big one is about facing illusions. So there may be a need to confront illusions or delusions, and the right person, as a person, you might experience a disillusion of old belief systems, and it's a period of intense self-discovery and spiritual growth. So when I think about Neptune and Aquarius, I think about the generation that, did not get to experience dial-up internet. I think about how you guys have always had iPads and iPhones and screens and TVs and laptops, and like everything's been like very digital. Being somebody who was born in the late 80s, I feel like I was right at the tail end of like, being the kids that were allowed to like go out and play and, be out on bikes and not have cell phones, and we scraped our knees and we didn't live on inhalers or anxiety meds. Like we were just going at life raw, right? I think that, with this particular conjunction, I think that there's like this really difficult transit maybe that they're going through, where they're realizing and like recognizing that what they've been watching is not necessarily truth. We may see that, particularly, these kids are getting triggered through things that they're watching, things that they're watching on videos. They could be obsessively watching videos. We might start to see the effects also of how that's affecting their nervous system because of the connection to Uranus, and an addiction to like, watching stuff, watching screens. That's kind of the feeling that I'm getting because of the connection to Neptune. Certainly I've seen like clients go through Pluto Neptune transits, and it generally it magnifies something about their philosophy or their belief system. I've seen some people say, oh, I was like raised in the Mormon church, and then I started realizing, the darker sides of the experiences that I had in that, world, and decided to kind of leave and, reject that particular religion, like literally, quote unquote. I've had that with a client. And it's interesting to see that, Pluto really shows himself in a sense of showing you, is it religion or is it a cult? Is it a nonprofit, or is it like a tax or money laundering scheme? Like, is it really, like your belief system, or are you just kind of like trying to escape something? It's a tricky line when you're dealing with Pluto and Neptune for sure. When I had my Pluto-Neptune transit, it was right after my Saturn transit, and a lot of my goals revolving around my Saturn stuff did really go hand in hand with like sobriety. And so this was a really interesting time in my life because I was very deeply immersed in learning about my family history, being in the fourth house, but also really kind of going back and forth with being like, well, do I have like the emotional and the psychological wherewithal to kind of do the work that I want to? It was a time where I was going in and out of ayahuasca ceremonies, like full disclosure, that's what I was doing. And I was doing that with the primary intention of getting sober and not relying on, anxiety medication or alcohol, because I have really bad anxiety. And so it was a really profound experience to go and sit in ceremony and to undergo that whole process, and to also work with healers that were really helpful, and like being really just vulnerable and kind of telling them what was up, what was going on with my health issues, and the fact that I was really struggling with not drinking alcohol or using recreational drugs. And it led to a complete epiphany and enlightenment. And after sitting about 3 or 4 times, I completely stopped drinking. And it was like that for several years, which went hand in hand with kind of returning back to meditation, doing my tarot reading, getting really good about journaling, studying a lot, and really focusing on, what my purpose was going to be. If it wasn't going to be doing what I had been doing for a living, then it was going to be going in a different direction where I felt like I could help people. And so I feel like that was the ultimate sacrifice, where I had to be willing to kind of say, okay, I have to be willing to not be afraid of the idea of not making any money. And I was listening to a lot of Alan Watts at the time. If you guys have I've listened to his lecture where he talks about what if money wasn't an object. If you haven't listened to it, I recommend that you do. And he was basically saying that when he would speak as a counselor with people, coming out of high school and going into college, about what they wanted to do, they would say, well, I'm going to school to be, go into economics, or I'm going to go into medicine, or I'm going to, go into business. And he would say, okay, well, if money wasn't an object, what would you do? And of course you hear things like, well, I want to be a painter or a poet, or I want to make film, or I want to train horses, whatever. And he would say, well, then go and do that. Go do that, and then the money will come. And so for me, that was such a powerful thing, because I think that I was, really dealing with major changes in the way that I look at what it means to be successful and how to feel fulfilled in doing what I was doing. And I had to kind of let go of any fears of not being able to make it work, not being able to make it happen. And it started really with me healing me. And so when I did that, then I gave myself basically like a year to say, okay, I'm gonna go and like launch my business. I'm gonna, seriously do these readings. After several years of like reading for friends and people being referred to me, people started paying me. I wasn't even asking for it. And after a year, I was able to kind of quit my full-time job and, become like a full-time tarot and astrology reader. And like that was now going on, 10, 11 years ago. So it's pretty cool to see how it's kind of transformed. But I liken it a lot to the Pluto-Neptune transit because I think that was really awakening me to my real purpose and also my belief system, what I believed in terms of this merger between esoteric and religious and like spiritual kind of background. And I learned a lot about my family's religion also in the process of that transit. Anyway, so if you guys are going through a Pluto-Neptune transit, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. If you're dealing with Neptune, watch for healers, guides, faith practitioners, anything revolving around churches, temples, healing centers, hospitals, or spirits, okay? Because definitely Neptune deals with spirits as well. And last but not least, we're going to talk about Pluto transiting Uranus, okay? So if you have Uranus anywhere between 28 degrees of Capricorn and 4 degrees of Aquarius, you are under a Pluto transit. Well, this is an interesting one because you've got Uranus in its ruling sign and you've got Pluto moving in there as well, okay? So get ready for radical change. I think that's the big takeaway for me. Pluto, transiting Uranus is about radical and unexpected changes in particular areas of your life. So you have to look at what house it's in. It's about experiencing disruptions that can lead to liberation from old patterns and limitations. It's also about the individual and collective transformation, because there's a simultaneous focus on the individual and collective. So where Pluto is activating that personal crisis, it's affecting a lot of other people at the same time. So you may play a role in ushering in innovation and progressive changes. Anything goes with Uranus. It's kind of like a wild card. You never know what you're going to get. And it definitely makes me feel like you guys may fare a little bit better in this than some of the other generations. Let me know if you have this aspect natally. I can think of a number of people who have this in Leo and also in Virgo. Anyway, so thinking about, this particular, conjunction, I think that it gives you the opportunity that through your own personal crisis, you're going to be kind of banding together with other people and kind of sharing in terms of your awakening, what you're realizing, what you're becoming aware of, and like the epiphanies that you're having. It does help to have like-minded people who are going to be going through this at the same time, and you're going to see that collectively everybody is going through this change. So you might be a little bit more well-received in terms of how you're, talking to other people about what you're hoping to change. You might be somebody who is playing a huge role in the change movement. So this is where it kind of pays to have planets that are in that particular ruling sign because it's really going to have a little bit more of an extra oomph. You'll see this through people like your friends, your groups, your networks, social media, groups. And coming together with other people to create some kind of change movement. So really, it's like a number of people going through this transit at the same time that may ultimately end up creating new systems that's going to be about exposing, crime, corruption, things that go on in the dark, and then providing like liberation. So through this crisis, we see opportunity for liberation. I think about how Pluto entered into my 4th house, and right after it did, it hit my natal Uranus. And so for me, that was more about me kind of going like, all right, there's something distinctly different or unusual about my living situation now, or something distinctly different about, what's going on with my home and my family. Obviously, Uranus being there, leading the pack with the planets in the 4th house, it's a bit of a wild one. My parents got married and divorced to each other twice. And then finally, after the second one and 3 kids later, they called it quits. So the moral of the story is I think, mom and dad love each other very much. You just can't be within like a 1-mile radius of each other. But Uranus being there showed me that I was like, there's something distinctly like different about my family. And so when Pluto kind of moved in there, I started realizing like, okay, so, we've had a tendency, the kids, to kind of bop back and forth between going through periods of living with dad and going through periods of living with mom. And at the time when Pluto came into my 4th house, I relocated from Arizona, where I was living with my father, to Los Angeles, where I was living with my mom. And it really brought about a lot of issues with my mom. A lot of it was me being a very rebellious teenager, because Uranus rules my 5th house. So there was a lot of going round and round, obviously, with a Capricorn, about, where I was, what I was doing, and also, just kind of being a teenager, sneaking into parties, getting into trouble, that kind of stuff. But what it brought up for me also was, this is really when my love for astrology really started. Okay, I was like 13, 14 years old. And that's when I, as a hobby, would like go and read astronomy books, go and read astrology books. I'd pick up horoscopes. I got my hands on tarot cards. It was like anything that I could do as a hobby for fun, relating to these subjects, I was doing that. And being that my Uranus was at a 2, it really drove for me, being like, well, I really, I want to have the money to be able to like, buy these books, or, to be able to, go to these shops and get the trinkets and the crystals and stuff. And it incentivized me to be like, well, I need to have money. I want to have a job. I want to decide, how I have fun, and I want to have a say in what I'm doing. And so it really created this really strong drive in me to want to be kind of like entrepreneurial. So it pushed me to get a job very young. I got my first job at like 14 and a half. I was working in a bakery. I worked there for all through high school. And yeah, basically, was getting up, baking bread, and sometimes going to classes as I was getting into my junior and my senior year. That's more Jupiter and Chiron and Ceres in my 10th house. But for me, I think it was really activating this intuition as well. Pluto was coming in, and I was seeing like, wow, I'm really picking up tarot cards. It makes sense to me. I'm reading these, and it just like kind of like reads like a picture. And yeah, I was working primarily to feel like I had the money to like buy my astrology books, but also if I wanted to buy concert tickets, right? Uranus's connection to the 5th. If I wanted to go out with my boyfriend, if I wanted to, buy beer at a party, it incentivized me to do that. So yeah, I was a little bit of a troublemaker with that transit, but I think I was a rebel with a cause, and it really showed me that, in a sense, having my own resources gave me the power to decide how I was going to spend it and how I was going to have fun. Definitely got me into a lot of trouble for sure, but at the same time, I think that it was the big reason for my love for astrology and what I do now. So watch for this, like I said, for you guys through your collective groups, your networks. Do let me know if you're going through these transits. I would love to hear how they're manifesting for you. Some of this may resonate with you guys in terms of experiences that you've had with your own Pluto contacts in your natal chart. I encourage you guys to leave them below in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you. You guys can share some of your experiences with other people. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching my videos, for supporting, for liking, commenting, and sharing. I hope you guys like this different style of like content, giving you a little bit more about my hot takes of what I've experienced, so I can kind of better help you guys. And if you're going through a Pluto transit, keep on keeping on. Like, I promise you, like, it's going to be worth it in the end. I'll be back here tomorrow. You guys can catch me at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. We are going to be doing live astrology readings. So check out my community tab if you'd like to get a reading, especially if you're going through a Pluto transit. It's a great way to get insight as to how to navigate that transit and hang out with us on a Friday night. Check out my links below if you guys want to see my website, book a personal reading, or pick up an astrology calendar. I also teach astrology, so if that's something that interests you, make sure you check out beyondtheveiledtarot.com. Until next time, I'll see all of you guys very soon. Happy haunts and take care.